Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
What binds two people together? Is it shared cultural or ethnic background? How about a shared faith? Can common worship practices and theological traditions or spiritual practices and style, can that be what really brings people together? Or maybe it's just age. Maybe what brings us together is a similar age where all our cultural reference points really line up. Maybe it's just things held in common. Two people who have the same hobbies or the same temperament style or the same little peccadillos. Maybe that binds people together. How about trauma? Maybe sharing trauma with somebody is something that would really bind and be binding. Well, I have a new one. How about two people who happen to be recipients of a major organ transplantation? Two people who happen to be the receivers of a gift, of a donor, a life-saving gift. Two people who ministered through severe illness and almost at death's door while doing it. Or maybe two people are bound together from learning lessons through health trauma. Today, my guest is Pastor Eric Thomas of St. Peter Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Pastor Eric is a friend of mine. Let me tell you how I got to know him. I went through my major transplantation surgery in October. I was able to recover pretty quickly from the new liver. And it was December on Christmas Eve. I was back in the pulpit, back at church, back at work. And on Christmas Eve, I was so blessed to take the pulpit and to step into it and to share once more with my people. And it turns out that Eric decided that he wanted to go to a quote-unquote quiet service. Pastor Eric is from a historically black congregation here in Atlanta. St. Peter's Missionary Baptist Church is one that's tradition is rather robust in worship. He said, our people don't do quiet services. What he wanted to go to was a Christmas Eve service and a candlelight tradition, and we were offering it that year. Now, why did he choose Peachtree Christian, which is so far away from his neighborhood? Well, it's because he had driven by it many times on his way to the hospital, which is not far from our church property. You see, Pastor Eric had been suffering from heart disease, and it was in late-stage heart failure that he pastored and waited for a heart for some 930-plus days. And so that was a lot of visits to the hospital. He drove by our church, and he was always curious. When I stepped into the pulpit on Christmas Eve, I used as some of my examples and illustrations, stories from my liver transplant, and it spoke to him. He took his phone out immediately during the sermon and wrote me an email congratulating me on a great church, a great service, a welcoming community, and a great sermon. And then he told me that he has recently, in the past few years, received a heart himself, and that we must be friends. Don't you just love it when somebody looks at you and says, can we be friends? Or we should be friends, or let's be intentional about friendship. I don't know where else I would have met Eric. I can tell you that most likely would have come from the community, because this is a guy who does not waste his time. He gets out and serves the people of Atlanta. He serves people through the mayor's office, through his congregation, through his neighborhood, through feeding the hungry in his neighborhood, through helping mentor young people in his neighborhood, and now in the organ donation and transplantation communities. He's always introducing me to people that I need to know that can help me get the word out, and that I can help get the word out as well. He is somebody who I look up to. Today in our conversation, I just asked him questions about what it was like living with his illness and preaching through it and living through it. What framing stories and images did he hold dearly to help see him through it? Who were some companions that came alongside of him to help him get through the ordeal? And we even talk a little bit about some spiritual experiences, some mystical things that might have happened and took place. At the end of the day, Pastor Eric's a very large man. He's played football, and inside his chest is the heart of a young man. I believe it was even a white man. We even talk about what it means to have the heart of somebody who doesn't look like you inside of you. I think it's an interesting conversation. It inspired me, and it's just the kind of thing we're looking at doing here at Complex Creatures. That's our show. It's a podcast about spirituality, the common good, and finding ways that we make and create meaning, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. How we can use our spiritual tools and resources to make other lives better and help other people flourish. Pastor Eric helps make me flourish. What binds two people together? Well, maybe it's all of that trauma that we went through that binds us together, but it's His grace that continues to hold us together in friendship. I hope you'll listen to this. I hope you'll be inspired. I hope it'll give you a sense of hope for living through difficult and challenging times. Please like and subscribe, and if this show means anything to you, share it with your friends. Bless you today. Well, Pastor, thank you for joining me today. I always think of you as a fellow brother in many ways, but
Right.
as somebody who serves in the clergy role, that's one way that we definitely have this link. And then really our friendship started because you learned I had an organ transplant.
Right.
As you were sitting in the pews on a Christmas Eve,
Mm-hmm.
and lo and behold, you're another minister in town who's got an organ transplant.
Correct.
So you had your heart transplanted a couple years ago.
Well, it's been 5 now.
In 5
Yeah.
years. These after COVID, time has been flying.
And that's exactly so. Mine was mostly doing COVID, so it seems like it's shorter, but it was 5 years.
Yeah,
COVID.
wow.
COVID changed time.
Okay, so in your story, in your personal journey through this process, you didn't realize that you had a heart condition
Correct.
of any type, but you just the realization that you're sick fell upon you pretty quickly, like it did for me,
Yes,
right? Can you
yes.
describe a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was in November of 2017, November 2016. I'm sorry. I was had my annual physical, and everything turned out fine. Everything was good. I was cleared to play in my alumni football game, and everything was great. Played in the game Thanksgiving Day and got the flu in January. And between January of 2017 and April of 2017, I physically began to diminish quite drastically. So January I was fine. February I wasn't so fine. January I had the flu, got over the flu, the symptoms of the flu, but my body continued to get weak. And so I went to the doctor several times, repeatedly. And each time, because I just had the physical, they were like, it's got to be this. So they named a lot of other things. And I can't blame them because my physical included EKG, heart, x-ray, and everything. So they wouldn't have seen it. So anyway, long story short, April 9th, I go back to the hospital, go to the hospital, check in the hospital, and say, hey, something's wrong with me. And they, by that point, I was big, swollen with fluid retention and so forth. And within, I'm going to say a half hour walking in, doctor came in and said I had end-stage heart failure.
So you had ascites. I think that's how we pronounce it when you're retaining the fluids, right? But you were diminishing other ways. You were losing muscle mass.
I was losing muscle mass. I was, with like I said, excited water retention, short of breath all the time. Short of breath, short of breath, and
you felt tired and lethargic and gross.
Moving the 20 feet from my chair to the pulpit was a journey.
And when you preach, you get after it physically, don't you?
Yeah, I'm very active.
So,
engaged.
I mean, that must have been hard.
It was tough.
Emotionally hard, too.
It was.
And people could tell?
People could tell. So with my height and weight, they couldn't see immediately that I was gaining weight. And they did. They just figured I was eating a lot of chicken. But over time, they began to see my weakness. I was short of breath, and I was, and I wasn't preaching the same way. And remember one Sunday before church, my oldest son was with me, we rode to church together, and he's like, Dad, I know that you don't feel like preaching. He said, but I want you to know that God's going to give you strength to preach. He said, but after that, I need us to go to the doctor again. And that's exactly what happened. So I preached, and we left and went back. And that was during that period of time between this initial illness and the diagnosis.
Yeah, and so you had this end-stage heart failure, and that was not a lifestyle cause thing. It wasn't like you were a heavy smoker and drinker, and you eat like tons of bad food. I mean, you did your health checkups.
Yep, every
I'm
year.
always preaching because I didn't for 5 years, and I'm always preaching, men, especially to men,
Right,
go to the doctor, go to the doctor. So you were taking care of yourself. This happened. It was genetic, I guess.
Well, no, it was called viral cardiomyopathy.
Oh, that's right, because you flu, right?
The flu virus. Yeah, I actually spoke about that yesterday. It was so 7 and 10% of people who get the influenza virus have it affects their organs. Of that 7-10%, Most people's bodies kicks the virus back out over time, and they're fine.
So, Pastor, does that cut across racial lines, or is that 7 to 10 all across the
That's
board?
all across the board.
Okay.
That's all across the board, yeah. And so then some other people, you hear somebody when they died of the flu, it's because of heart or another organ failure, normally
Really?
heart or lungs. And for me, it was the smaller percentage of people who get it and live with it. But ultimately, had I not had transplant, my diagnosis would have been, okay, that's what I would have died of.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So between the time that you found out you had the heart failure to the transplant, we're talking a couple years?
935 days.
935 days. I always like, because you know dates and you
Yeah.
know numbers about it really well, which marks, it says something. It says something about that journey for you. I mean,
Yes.
It really did a number on your mentality of thinking about time and energy and life. So it's 935 days, and in those days, what was life like?
So, two things you just mentioned. Each day became this when they waited every day for the manna to come. They had to depend on God day by day, and that's what I had to do. I learned, and I preached about it, and I thought I'd done it, but I really had to operate in that space. Like waking up in the morning, I praise the Lord. Thank you for another day. And I went about that day with the understanding that was just this one day, and I was going to do the most I could with the said day. And I was going to trust God for the next day, because you couldn't hoard days. Because again, I think
you can't hoard the days.
Yeah,
I can quote that.
you can't hoard the days. And quite frankly, each night the doctor told me, because my heart function was 9%, so it's very low. Any AFib, which was always a constant issue, an AFib or a heart arrhythmia, could have thrown me into failure. It could have thrown me into a heart attack, I should say. So my heart was so weak that anything that would have thrown this rhythm off would have resulted in cardiac arrest or heart attack. So because of that reality, I live with that every day, quite all day long. And so because of that reality, I came to the space where I just began to trust God with each day, and it changed my perspective. It wasn't so much that I didn't plan for a future, but I just came to it broke it down to the very basis level.
Yeah.
I'm trusting God with this day to get to this next place.
I often reflect on how, like, a lot of the lessons I learned from having liver disease and then transplant and being close to death twice, none of the lessons are all that new. Like, I knew them intellectually. I knew them from my studies.
Right.
But they are new in how they affected my heart.
Correct.
It wasn't head knowledge, it was in my heart knowledge. It was in my bones.
Right.
And so so you always knew, you've known since you were, in Sunday school, that you don't have infinite days. You don't even know if you have tomorrow. You got to live today for the good things, for God, and for everything that's meaningful in life. But now you're facing it.
Right.
And that it's like an object lesson
it's an object lesson
that's severely real.
Right. It's severely real, and you actually walk it out. That's what we did. We walked it out. We walked through what we are taught.
Existential knowledge, maybe that's why we say that. Geez. So you could always possibly have a heart attack. It's always possible. So you just have to learn to live that day and the next day and take it as it comes.
Take it as it comes, yeah.
Did that make you more grateful?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
day?
Unequivocally, I became more grateful because, again, when you can't take anything I couldn't take anything for granted, you know, and because of that, the little things that you would take for granted, I couldn't take for granted more, like going to sleep, waking up. You go to sleep, you're going to wake up. But for me, going to sleep didn't necessarily mean you're going to wake up, here. And so because of that, I began to be grateful again for every day, every little thing, everything, especially as it relates to my children. Each new thing they accomplished, driver's license, graduation,
football games,
honor rolls, all of those things became like a big deal because I saw it and I wasn't supposed to see it, because I think I mentioned that when they walked out the room the day I was diagnosed, the doctor said I'd give him 3 months without a transplant. And so I knew I didn't have a transplant, so that meant I was on a clock that somebody set. Now was I on their clock? No, but that's the clock they set, and it was. So imagine their clock over here in the corner, and I'm on God's clock, like I'm trusting you with this day, Lord, and I'm just giving it over to you. And so when that day, they had a countdown clock, I had a count up clock. I was counting up. Lord, each day He gave me was a blessing, was a benefit. So day 1, April 10th, day 1, day 2, April 11th, day 2, I'm here. Thank you, Lord, for another day. So that's why I ended up with the 935-day count.
You had a count up clock.
Yeah.
That's a second quotable for me. You can't hoard your days. You got a count up clock.
Yeah.
I like that very much. Let me ask you this question about about that time and in each day, did you identify in your mind? Did you think of yourself as I'm a sick person? Was that your did you was that your self identity?
So let me answer that question in this context. So initially I did, and I kept having this, and I don't know why this was my vision. I could see it, and this wasn't like a God vision. This was just something that was the fear and doubt in my mind. I pictured myself. That's a better way to put it. In the hospital room, kind of shriveled up,
Mm,
under a white sheet, hooked up to these machines. And the first time I saw it, I laid on my face and asked the Lord to take that from me and let me live.
wow.
That was my request. I said, Lord, let me live. Let me not picture that as my end. You said you hadn't expected anything from me. It's good. I'm trusting you. I'm going to believe in you. But I don't want that to be what I'm thinking about. And so let's say, for example, that happened within the first 2 weeks of my diagnosis. By and large, from that moment, I didn't consider myself sick. I
Really?
considered myself preparing for what God had for me next. That's what I thought. Like, this is a part of my life, but God has something beyond this. And my something was it could have been be with the Lord, it could have been being healed here. But I knew that this wasn't, I didn't picture myself as a sick man. And I think for Christians, that's something that we probably need to focus more on. Our situation doesn't dictate, who we are. Our situation, what we're going through, is just what we're going through to accomplish what God has for us. Like, if you read the book of Philippians, about 24, 27 times, Paul says joy. You would never have known he was in a jail when he was writing that letter, because
Mm-hmm.
the jail didn't dictate how he felt about who he was in Christ. And
Yes.
so if I pictured myself sick, then I would operate as a sick person.
So are you saying that our situation does not dictate our identity?
Correct.
And so your identity should be maybe that thing that pulls you through your situations.
Correct.
That's very healthy. I
Mhm.
mean, to me, I think what you're talking about could be put in other ways, like just like the story you tell yourself about your life.
Mhm.
That story that we use
Mhm.
can say, I mean, it can put us on a joyful path.
Right.
It can put us on, a
That's-
morose one,
it
right?
can.
A
Yep.
scary one.
Mhm.
The story we tell ourselves a story. Well, if only I, could get that new organ,
Yeah.
then I'll be happy.
Right.
Well, you've gotten your new organ. I've gotten my new organ.
Mhm.
We know that we still have difficulties
They
every
have
day.
difficulties,
So
correct.
there's never but that story is a limiting story.
Right. That's for sure.
Sounds like you were trying to tell yourself a graceful story.
Yes. That's what I
All
was
the way
doing.
through, like, I got this day, I got to go, and I'm going to be who God's called me to be, no matter
No matter what.
if I'm weak or if I'm
Yeah.
strong.
I'm strong. And quite frankly, I learned that what the Paul, 2 Corinthians 12, when Paul says, when I'm weak, you become strong. So Paul wasn't saying he got strong. It was just God became strong in him. And I
Mm.
learned that real lesson. Not just in a physical sense, even in a spiritual sense. Like, Paul said he had this thorn, and I'm not sure if you ever know what the thorn is, but I imagine my thorn at that particular moment was heart failure. That it was supposed to prevent me from doing the things that God called me to do. But I was like, okay, Lord, I'm trusting you. And countless times during that period, I experienced the strength of God to say, to be who He called me to be.
That's incredible. Do you think that going through that has given you this like new sort of? Did it give you a new zest for life? And like, I mean, I only know you on this side of your transplant.
Mhm.
So the man I know is serving a congregation. He serves his local community.
Mhm.
You serve the city. I mean, you've been involved with two different, at least I know, two different
Mhm.
mayoral office outreach to church pastors and
Mhm.
ministries. I mean, you're engaged in the transplant organizations and community.
Mhm.
You're deeply connected and connecting people all the time. It seems like you just have this energy and enthusiasm to do good in this world.
Mhm.
Do you think going through this has kind of heightened that?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
speak to that.
I think that, prior to the diagnosis, I think I did a good amount. I think I was engaged,
Hmm.
but I think my passion and the energy that I give now, it does come as a result of those moments in time when maybe I was prohibited from planning to do something. Like,
Mm,
I lived every day trusting the Lord, but sometimes there would be things that I couldn't. And I will admit this, there were some things that I would never I wouldn't allow the plan because I thought I was being presumptuous.
Yeah, I get
Yeah.
that completely.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when I after the transplant, I was healed, delivered, and strengthened. I said, now I'm gonna go. I'm gonna kick it into gear now because I do recognize time is not infinite for real. And while I have this energy and this time, if it's a year, 10 years, or 20 years, whatever, I'm gonna give my very best and accomplish these things the Lord has given me. I should share this to highlight that. So after the transplant, right before they discharged me, I was in the room. They said, we're going to run this. No, that's what it was. They were going to put this port in me, but to fight the CMV virus. You're familiar with that? So,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so they said, well, so they wanted me to be on antibiotics, just to say 3 weeks after transplant. So they took me down to, I guess, radiology or wherever. And so I'm laying on the table, and I'm relaxed, feeling good. And if you can imagine, there are like these 4 tiles here. There were 4 screens. I could see them crystal clear. And each of the screens had a call for me, like work for me to do. One was personal, one was church related, one was the body of Christ related, and one was community related. Those are my 4 screens. And so I saw it, and I was laying there, and they were, working on me or whatever. And I said, yes, Lord. And they looked at me, and they didn't understand, because they didn't nobody ask me anything. But I said, well, don't worry about it, it's fine. So they take me back up to my room after it's over, and I'm sitting there in my chair, and I have like a little pen of some sort, and I'm writing on the napkins from my food tray, everything that God has showed me on the screens. And so after, I started making phone calls. So the first call I made, because the personal one, it was just mine to handle. The second one had to do with this work, Metropolitan Ministry Alliance, bringing, equity issues, particularly as it related to health, to the community. So I called, 4 of my closest friends, said, hey, we're going to start this organization. And I guess I'm in the hospital, like, okay, whatever, we'll do it, So we, I didn't have any argument, any discussion, and everybody fell into their role. One of my friends works with Habitat Humanity, he passes in Henry County, so he immediately went to work on the 501c3. And so then, by the time I got situated at home, we were just about a 501c3. So that was the work. So that was one of the works. And the other 2 works were ministry. So what I do, I start sketching out, here's what the Lord wants us to do as a church. And of course, at that moment in time, they were receiving without question, because they had seen me near death, and now they saw me walking back in the life that clearly God had given me. And so it was like kind of like when Moses came down from Mount Sinai and he was glowing. They were like, whatever, we're ready to roll. So anyway, so my agenda was written on the screens, and so I just followed the agenda.
Do you feel like that was a genuine spiritual experience on
Absolutely.
that table?
Yes. No, it was.
Some people get weirded out when we talk like that,
Yeah,
but I wonder if those doctors and nurses have stories that they tell about their patients having these. Because, I mean, I had one. I had several experiences that were just, they're things that I could probably explain away.
Right.
I could probably, let me tell you why I think that happened in my brain or something. But I don't care to.
Right.
I believe and have faith in it, and there was just something that was beyond, and that's incredible. You got a sense of like calling and mission right there on the table.
On the table.
And you've gone forward with it. That's incredible. I appreciate hearing that so much. Now, let me ask you about some companions along the way.
Okay.
Okay. People who were helpful to you, who walked with you through this, or gave you encouragement. Was there any nurses or people like that who blessed you along the way?
Yeah, so there were 2 particular people, one of which is my home health nurse, Rosie. So Rosie is close to, you hear the word God saying, and we understand it, but that's what she was. So the day that Rosie was assigned by whatever, I don't remember naming her company, it was just Rosie to me. Rosie came over. So this was the day I had was discharged from the hospital for having this implant for this machine called a meal neurone pump. So the meal neurone pump was designed to put this particular liquid, medicine in you to make your heart beat. It's optimally, despite the fact that you had heart failure. And it was a procedure they had to do to put it in me. So anyway, I'm totally anxious about this machine being in me, because that's not something you get.
Yeah. My life is happening because of a thing that's put inside of me, right?
A thing that's put inside of me,
that's
right?
Weird.
Yeah, it was weird. And so I get to the house, and I'm kind of and so she comes in, and she's about this tall, and she comes in and say, Mr. Thomas, we're gonna get right to this, and we're gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be good. And we hadn't had any conversation, so that's what she said. But I felt better because of how she said it, but it was really the Lord, I found out within moments that she was a Christian, and the Lord had, her nursing wasn't just because she had a nursing degree. It was kind of like and she chose this particular type of work because she worked with people who were in heart failure. And she came in, and within moments, we talked and made a spiritual connection, and from that day on, that was probably, I'm going to say that was the mid-October of 17. So probably, yeah, 2 years. So 104 weeks, we saw each other every week, every Tuesday. And like I said, it was more like our Bible study. She taught a class at her church. She was a United Methodist over here in Southeast Atlanta. And I was, of course, Baptist, and I wasn't. My church actually not far from where she goes to church, but it became it was like she ministered to me, and I was able to in turn minister back to her, and it was a great, and I know the Lord sent her. I know no question about the Lord sending her, and I'll circle this by saying this. I never told my congregation, not the entire congregation, what was happening with me. They saw the physical change. They saw all the changes in me. But I did tell leadership because I knew that, in the Baptist, it's not like somebody can dispatch another pastor. It's kind of an autonomous situation. So I wanted to have things ready just in case. And she showed up for church, what we call the watch night services, midnight service on
New
Year's Eve. Yeah. So she says, I'm coming to church this week. And so just for context, Rosie's white. And so, but she's
so the watch night services, just for clarification, folks, that's a very traditional service in African American communities. As far as I can tell, from what you tell me any more that I don't know, there's kind of like to me a twofold sense of it. One is kind of theological, waiting for Jesus to come, and the other is like, I know that Frederick Douglass held a party waiting for Lincoln to sign that Emancipation Proclamation, right at the same time, like on the New Year's or whatever. It was. So and it kind of has those two reference points to it. Is that right?
And the third party, so that's definitely two reference points. The third reference point, however, is everybody went to church for group safety, because just in case the people didn't want to accept slavery, they were going to be they didn't want to accept slavery's end. They were going to be together in the church. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's why they watched into the new year, and they looked around and said, we're free.
Yeah.
So it was all three of those things.
Okay, cool. So she's white.
She's white.
And she comes around.
She comes in. And so my congregation is loving, but I'm sure they were like, well, what is she doing here tonight? Because it was nighttime, and my church is in a urban area. And she came and showed up in church. And so it was at that moment that the Lord said, tell the church. And she was there. And, I stood up before the sermon, and I said, let me say this. I said, this is my nurse, Rosie. And I said, I want y'all, and so we had this little fellowship. I want everybody, and I'm going to tell you why. I said, I'm going to tell y'all why. I want everybody to go hug Rosie. So the whole church, just, 200-300 people at midnight, 10 o'clock. It's because we start at 10 o'clock, hugging Rosie. I said, let me tell you who Rosie is. I said, Rosie has been my nurse for the last couple of years. And I said, and Rosie is my nurse because I'm in heart failure. And I'm waiting even this day on a heart transplant.
Wow.
And so, I didn't know what their response was going to be.
Right.
I said, but I'm trusting God. And everybody jumped up and started praising the Lord. And just, it was just like, they didn't take, I guess, I don't even know why, except for just the presence of the Lord. They didn't take it as, oh, no. There was not one no in the building. It was just a series of people praising the Lord. Like, okay, we waiting on this. We're together. And so I preached a sermon, and it was interesting. One of my fraternity brothers, we pledged together. He had recently, just before that, had a kidney transplant. He was driving back from his wife's parents' house, and he stopped just off the highway to pull into my church to be at the watch night service, and got back on the road because he had to be at his church the next morning. He's a deacon at his church, and he pulled in, and so he was there, for that moment, and he, came down and we hugged, and he testified about, because he was recently from a kidney transplant. So anyway, Rosie was one of those people that just was transformative for me. She,
that watch night service had another element for you then, because this is very real, sort of like a watch night for your own. Like, you probably took those feelings into every major holiday, right?
Yeah.
So how long after that service did it take for you to get the heart?
So that was on December 31st. So it was October 31st. So it was pretty much the whole year.
Yeah.
But I got to say this. I didn't live 2019 like I lived 2018. Let me tell you why I say that. 2018 rather, I lived, as I said, day by day, waiting on the Lord. I lived 2019 in expectation. I
Really?
expected every day to be the day. And when it wasn't that day, I didn't get down about it because I expected the next day to be that day.
Uh-huh.
So my perspective went from I'm trusting God day to day, that you know what, I'm waiting on the Lord. He's about to do this. And I'm
Wow.
trusting him for it. And I'm waiting on him. And it's about to happen.
Hope is not blind or naive optimism.
Hmm.
Hope is like a force that pulls you into the future.
It does. That's what
There's
it
a
is.
weightiness to hope, and it pulls you forward. Let's talk about the time that you get that phone call.
Okay.
You know, you get the phone call from the hospital. What's it like?
So that morning, I woke up, and at the time, you know, I was pastoring and I was working for the mayor at the time, city. So I woke up that morning, probably about 7 o'clock, and just didn't feel the best, which will sometimes happen. And you know, just
Sure.
sometimes it's just not, you don't feel the best. And so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna take off work today. I'm just gonna lay down here and I'm gonna cut this phone off and I'm gonna go to bed. And just before I push the power down button, I get a phone call from one of my members, and he, you know, we talked, but he never. The idea of him calling me at 7 o'clock without there being a good reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I said, well, something, he must need me. So I answered the phone, and he tells me he's got this doctor's appointment that day. And I said, okay, well, let's pray. So we prayed, and when I finished praying, I felt better. I said, well, I guess I go to work. So I get up, get dressed, I'm headed to work, but I'm literally about maybe 300 yards from my church when I'm headed to this meeting. And I get the phone call. So I had two phones. One of them vibrated, but by the time I picked it up, it was just a missed call. The next phone rang immediately after that. I picked it up, and it was my doctor. And he said, Mr. Thomas? I said, yes, doc. He said, listen, what are you doing? And I said, I'm just headed to the meeting, doc. What's going on? He says, well, if you got time, we got this heart out here at Piedmont for you. And so you know, it was like,
You know that man loved to make that phone
right.
call.
I know he loved to make it. I know that he loved it because we still laugh about it now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know this. The emotions were like, it was like all over the place because you were, quite frankly, frightened because you knew that you were about to undergo a significant surgery where one organ was going to be taken out, and at least for a minute we weren't going to be there, and then another organ was going to get put in. Then you had the excitement about, okay, I've been waiting on this, and the Lord has answered my prayer. There was nervousness, all that. So I cried like tears for different, like I don't know, the tears all had different little connections to them. But I did this. I drove to the church. I was 300 yards away. I drove to the church. I pulled up, went inside the sanctuary, laid down on the altar, and I asked the Lord. I said, Lord, I'm asking that you would bring me through this, and I would see this place again and not be seen in this place again, because where I was laying was about 4 feet from where we would normally put a casket.
Yeah.
And so I asked the Lord for that, and I got up, and my best friend, who I would put in my list of people who the Lord sent, he moved his family from North Carolina down here because at the time my kids were in school and I was by myself, and he moved his family down. So I called him as I was walking to church. Hey, man, they called me. He said, I'll meet you at the house. So he leaves his house, drives to my house. So I'm in there praying. And so he calls me, I'm walking out of the sanctuary. Hey, man, I'm at your house. Where are you? I said, I was praying. He said, man, you got to come on. We got to get to the hospital. So I drive to the hospital. And, you know, you're supposed to keep a bag packed. Of course, I didn't have my bag packed, so I packed my bag. We head up the highway. We get to the hospital, and, you know, people are there already waiting because we had this code. I was going to call the church and call the church secretary, my deacons, kind of leader of the deacons, and he was going to, you know, they were going to do a calling post saying, hey, Pastor Thomas is about to go in surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so the funny part about it is I had a phone. I was on Facebook at the time, and the phone was just blowing up. My phone was blowing up, and I said, what's happening? And I didn't even think about the fact that it could have been to do with me. I looked, and all of my members were like calling out, you know, like telling their other friends and other pastors. Everybody was like, Pastor Thomas about to go into surgery. And by the time I get to the hospital, you know, some of my friends were already there. They beat me to the hospital. So I get to the hospital, and I walk up. I got to tell the story. I always forget to tell the story. So I walk up to the administration desk, and I says, hey, I'm here, Eric Thomas. And the lady's like punching these keys, and you know, she's punching me after 3 minutes. She said, I don't have you in the computer. I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go to the bathroom, and you'll find me by the time I get back. 'Cause I'm like, I know I didn't come down here, and I'm not in this computer. So I walk away, come back. She said, oh, you know what? I found you right here. And so I guess she was looking in the main database. I was at some up here at the transplant, because I didn't mention I was there for a transplant. I just said I'm here for surgery. So 30 minutes later, they come down and said, Mr. Thomas, we got your room ready for you. And they were like, well, do you need to be a stretcher? And I was standing up. I said, no. She said, what about the wheelchair? I said, well, I guess I can just walk up there, right? She said, yes. She said, well, it just doesn't happen like that. I said, well, we'll walk up. So we walked up, and I got in the room and got, into the gear to get us ready for transplant. And so it was just I mean, what can you say? Was it a fun time? Yeah, it was a great time because I knew that on the other side of this day, I was going to be different, one way or
Yeah,
another,
one way or the other.
one way or the
The
other.
outcomes are good,
Mm-hmm.
and chances are you're going to have a high quality of life and you're going to get to live longer.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Do you know whose heart you have? I know you do.
Yeah. As a young man, he was 20, and so I was 51 at the time. So he was an athlete. And I'll tell you how I found this out because I didn't even get a chance to go through the other channels that we could go through. He was a Christian and was looking to be a missionary, which I thought was
Pretty fitting for you.
pretty fitting. So while I was in surgery, one of my classmates from college, somebody posted, let's pray for Eric. He's having a transplant. She was in the hospital room of the young man. Oh, I'm sorry. She was at the house of the young man who donated, who's my donor, with his family because of his death.
Incredible.
And she said, I wonder, is this Eric? And so she called my best friend who I just mentioned. We were all in the same class. And he said, yeah, Eric's getting a transplant. And she says, what do you know about the donor? And he says, the only thing they mentioned is he was young. He was in, I think he may have mentioned the part of the state he was in. And she said, I think that's my daughter's best friend, Art. And so, yeah. So after it took a minute, I talked to the family, started during the pandemic. But they were, emotional.
Sure.
And, it just makes you emotional to think about just, a young man. But
Do you feel any strange kinship with the person? I mean, I often think about I don't really know much yet, and I don't know if I ever will about the donor whose liver I have. But I have this sense of gratitude and connection to an unknown at this point in time.
yeah,
But do you feel any sense of kinship?
I do. And I think that probably what changed or what was different in terms of the spiritual context is just a bigger drive for the unsaved. And maybe that's because he had a missionary zeal. I have turned the most frustrated I've been the last 3 years is when, for some reason, my church kind of forgot about missions.
Reaching out to folks.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I said, wait a minute, because we have a missionary, and he and I talked, and he says, we were talking, so I said, well, how's our support? You've been getting our support. He said, no, I haven't got anything. I was like, wait a minute, so I called church. I said, well, we just got busy. So I was like, no, that's not what we do. But more importantly, on a one-to-one basis, like for me, missionary work is foreign, but the community I serve, mission work is local, because we're sharing and showing Christ to a community of people who somehow or another for 2 generations didn't have a Christ concept. Back when I was growing up, everybody's parents and grandparents went to church, but that's not always the case now. And so my push for that is probably more significant. And I do feel a sense of kind of, like you said, I guess a sense of the unknown, and it's just, but the feeling of gratitude is overwhelming.
Did you tell me that this person's heart is a young white man?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is that interesting to you to have a white man's heart?
It is. And
I mean,
it's interesting,
Yeah.
because, my friends, I don't even know who said it at first. Like, I'm not even sure who the first person that actually made the comment, but it was kind of interesting. And I was like, yeah, but I mean, I don't,
Does it teach us anything about humans and race and the way we think? I mean, I had coffee yesterday with a woman who had a liver transplant, and she's one of these forces of nature. She's now leading all these different liver organ organizations. And she was telling me that she has this belief. She asked me, she kind of leaned in quietly and says, so has anything changed about you? As if to say that the organ can change your personality a little here or there. And she told me about things that she likes to eat that are different. She told me she's having these reoccurring dreams that she thinks says something. And she's just convinced that it's a man's liver because it's so large compared to her frame.
Oh, really?
And she says and she's got all these thoughts about it. And I have to say, I don't have a terribly long list of things that I think might be different, but it does occur to me that I could have the liver of a woman. It could be a young person, an older person. It could be a black person, a white person. It could be a person who, had a whole different experience in mine. I'm a Christian man. This could be a Buddhist liver. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Yet somehow it says something about our shared reliance upon life. I mean, we all come from the same place.
Same place. And that all of these organs that we have that God designed in the very beginning are they're this colorblind. They don't know their color. They're not color. They're just organs that in our bodies. And so, skin color may have come from, the amount of melanin in the skin or where we were or just the need for melanin because we were in a hotter place. But the bottom line is God made all of us the same.
Well, there's one human race.
Huh? One human race. Yeah, one human race.
And we have decided to find ways to separate.
To
right?
separate, yeah.
Well, let's talk about an area. I do want to talk about an area where race is important in terms of the transplant stories. I know that you are very involved with LifeLink and other organizations that are trying to increase, what did you say, trying to increase the number of donors that exist?
Yeah, organ donors, correct.
Organ donors. Organ donation is underserved, as I understand it, or the like are underrepresented in religious settings and settings of persons of color.
Correct. That's correct.
What thoughts do you have about that?
So for the religious setting, it's kind of interesting because people, interestingly enough, feel like if you die, you donate your organs, you can't make it to heaven. So they miss out on the whole glorified body, operation in 1 Corinthians. That's what I've heard. I mean, because as a matter of fact, I signed up to be an organ donor probably a year or two before I had needed an organ, and it was interesting because I had never considered it. And while I was at the event, that was the question everybody was asking, and then everybody was like, well, I would, but I got to keep these organs. That's how I'm ready to go to heaven and blah 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 blah. So I'm thinking to myself, well, that's ridiculous. This is not the body that we go to heaven in. This is not where we're going to be. Not having an organ is not the whole thing. And so anyway, I jumped up and signed up, and a few other people signed up after me. And so I had, from that point, had a couple of organ donation presentations because we do know there's a shortage. And unfortunately, percentage-wise, especially related to kidneys, African Americans need kidneys at a higher rate than.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so, there are a lot of kidneys that that our community would not donate organs. There's always a constant shortage. So, and so if you take it out of church setting and put it in a community setting.
Well, real quick on that, and then
Okay.
we'll get to the community setting. But just, have you ever read anything of St. Augustine's City of God, that huge book that he wrote? I mean, it's like that, it's like
Okay.
that thick, right? And it's during the fall of the Roman Empire, and he's basically talking about that world and the kingdom of God, the ideal city of heaven, if you will, compared to it. So it's basically a way of thinking publicly and out loud about the difference that Christianity should be making. And there's just so many wonderful things in there. But then there's this one section that I remember reading where he's basically talking about the resurrection. And he's talking about, well, some people think that you need to be buried, right? And cremation is a thing that some Christians at some point have been kind of turned their nose at. But he goes, well, look, I mean, if God can raise the body, then, I don't know if we have any problem, right? But he goes and says, well, what about the Christian that was fed to lions? What about the dismembered?
Right.
And, if God can do half of the body thrown in the ocean, half buried, God will sort it out.
He'll sort it out. He'll sort it out. Right. That's
it's sort of a logic of realizing if God is God, then you're okay.
Yeah.
And okay. So what about the community aspect?
I think it still defaults back to that whole, having my whole body together thing. It's almost like this is an interesting little anecdote I would like to share. So after I had my transplant, my son, we're going to renew his license, and he's like, I'm not gonna donate my organs because they're taking our organs. So I look him right in the face and said, say it again. He said, yeah, I want to donate my organs because they'll take our organs. I said, so you realize that you're looking at a person who benefited from someone else's organs? I didn't think about that. So I said, what do you mean they're taking your organs? He says, well, they'll take black people's organs because, especially if somebody needs our organ, to take our organs. And I said, well, I just don't think that's what's happening.
Because of past injustices and things like
That's what-
there has been experimentation done on the
yeah.
African American community and terrible stuff.
Yeah, I concur. But
It's created that suspicion
and that suspicion, yeah. But I still think that I do know that that's where it stems from. But from my perspective, I would rather be a donor and let that.
But you also have you seen behind the curtain?
I've seen behind the curtain.
And you know where we're at now.
Yeah.
And so you're saying where we're at now, we got to get past those narratives because the need is great.
The need
I mean,
is
was
great.
that fair?
That's exactly what I'm saying. Precisely what I'm saying. So, I think that that's a area that we continue to talk about and continue to encourage. And so people like me who have benefited from it can talk about it with a different level of clarity. And I do it in my church. And so, I'm not gonna say my church is 100% donors, but quite a few I do know signed up over the years because of what they actually saw. Nobody's gonna hurt you, but if the Lord calls you and you're able to be your organs and help somebody else, and they're willing to do that.
Yeah, incredible. That's
Mhm.
incredible to me. So, what do you think? What do you think are some lessons that you have taken with you from this entire experience? I mean, I think you've been saying them all along the way, but are there any other lessons, spiritual lessons, or things that you just think? Listen, let me put it another way. I know that I would, if I had to plan my life, I would not have chosen
Mm-hmm.
to have gone through what I went through.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't be something that I'd say, yeah, I wanna have an organ fail and
Mhm.
almost die.
Right.
But now I've gone through it,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know that I would change anything because I've come out on the other side in some way
Mhm.
better, I think.
Yes,
Can you say that?
that's exactly my position. I wouldn't have, if you had asked me in 2000, hey, write the next 20 years of your life, I would have not included that in there. But having been through it, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't go back and rewrite it.
Mm.
It was, as you said, and I think that's the best way to put it, I'm a whole nother person as a result of the journey to transplant, and then post transplant, what the Lord has allowed me to experience. So I probably may not have been able to appreciate some of the things that God has allowed me to see in the last 5 years if it hadn't been for the 935 days leading up to it.
Right.
So I can, it's kind of funny. I preached that before. I said sometimes God has to take us through things in order to prepare us for what He has for us. So it's just like you don't give your 7-year-old keys to your car, because they're not ready to drive it. There are some things they have to, their skills and motor skills and all these things have to be developed in order for them to be a functional driver. You don't just hand them the car just because you can. That's what I think, that there are things that I probably couldn't handle that He's given me, whether they be a blessing or, quite frankly, a challenge. I can navigate it better because of what I learned during this period of time leading up. When I first had my surgery, I was in the hospital, and I first, I guess, was coherent. My oldest son called me, we were talking, and he said, "I wanted you to know something." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "I wanted you to know that I never thought you weren't going to make it to transplant." And that's why he said that. He said, "Well, my whole life," he said, "you walk by faith and not by sight." He said, "I saw countless times that you just said, well, I'm just going to trust God with this." He said, "And I just didn't see how God wouldn't do for you as you were walking in a way to showing others how to walk for Him." And he was, I guess he's like 18, 19 at the time. And I played it back in my head and I thought about it. And it gave me a better understanding of the concept of walking by faith. You can't see. I couldn't see. There was no date set that I was going to get a transplant. I didn't know what the next day was going to hold. I just knew God held the next day. And so because of that, my faith walk allowed me to swallow some fears and doubts, or apply the faith in God to these fears and doubts like an ointment, and just,
Mm.
move them out the way, or cause them not to be in my way. And so,
That's a good word, but I also have to say, must be wonderful to hear that from your own son.
yeah,
To say
yeah,
that to you.
yeah, it was very emotional. It was very, I wept after I got the phone with him, because for him to see that, I mean, he saw something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
I'm grateful that you got to hear that from him.
Yeah.
So often we don't hear the things that people feel that are even positive.
right. Correct.
Yeah. Well, there's this story I'm going to tell. I'm going to tell this kind of out loud to you,
Okay.
in case I haven't, but I think I probably have shared this with you. A time that you ministered to me,
Mm-hmm.
you came to our church on Christmas Eve.
Mm-hmm.
That's the December after my transplant. So
Mhm.
I transplanted in late October.
Mm-hmm.
I actually recovered very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Really?
And I went back to work after 6 weeks, and I think most people in my situation are out about 6 months, but
Mhm.
everything was just going I mean, things worked out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to come back, and we had Christmas Eve, and you had come to one of the services, and You heard me say from the pulpit that I have a transplant. It was part of my stories, and you fired off an email to me during service, and you said we should connect. So in the new year, we connected for coffee just up the street from here, across from Piedmont,
Right.
across the hospital that you went to and I went to. And at that time, I didn't say it out loud because I didn't know I didn't know where I was at. But the doctor called me when I was away for the holiday. I went away for like a week or so back home and was with family, and they called me with my most recent labs, and they said, you're starting to have a little bit of rejection, which means that my body's starting to reject the new organ, and that scared me. Now, what you don't understand at the time is that, rejection is kind of a spectrum. Your
Yeah.
body's always going to try to reject something new. So the medication that we take, we're going to take the rest of our lives, is anti-rejection. Means it knocks your immune system down so your body won't fight it off. And really, rejection is mostly treated just from changing medications
Correct.
and stuff. And especially early on, your body is still figuring things out.
Yep.
But in that moment, I was standing there. I had some of that anxiety in my mind, thinking, I don't know what this means. I really don't have any clue what it means. And in the midst of just talking, hearing your story, me sharing a bit of my story, going back and forth, you decided, and I'm just going to claim the idea that God put it on your heart to say. You said in the middle of the Starbucks, you said, hey, you're a baby into this. You're still new. You said, don't get down if things aren't quite working out right. If you're testing, if your numbers come back different, he goes, and then, he goes, because you got to take a little while before the medicine and before your body figures out. And then you kind of got a little loud. You put a little preacher voice on, and he said, God didn't bring you through all that for nothing. And you kind of hit the table a little. And I just smiled, and I shook your hand. And I still didn't tell you that I was in that situation, but I thought I just needed to hear that.
Wow.
And I appreciate you saying that to me.
Yeah, well.
But it was kind of the example of, in that case, you had been a little further down the trail than I was.
Right.
And you're able to kind of speak back and say, hey, it gets a little easier coming up. Don't worry so much.
Right.
And now I'm in this position where I realize that, you just got to take it one step at a time, even in post. Yeah, just one step at a time.
Yep.
Right, one day at a time.
One day at a time. That's right.
I know that sounds cliche, but it's so really, really true.
Well, it's real for us.
Yeah.
It's real. We get a chance to see it in a real sense, and it's real.
I mean, I'm still in that phase sometimes where I'll feel beat down, run down, tired, whatever, and be like, I don't know what's going on with me. And my wife will remind me, well, you're going really hard, and you're an organ transplant patient.
You're an organ transplant patient.
You have a chronic condition now. Basically, you can always get sick. I mean, so I went and worked out this morning. The trainer that I saw there, did the knuckle thing, and then he told everyone how sick he's been, and he's got this cold. And I'm like, oh man,
right?
I walk over and wash my hands.
Right. That is something we both have to do. I was at me and my sons with. Then my youngest son came to town, and we went to dinner, and I saw this guy that I knew, and I had seen his little son. So kids, of course, like they just have all of the different colds and viruses. He shook my hand. I said, I gotta go. So I waited till he left, and I went and washed my hands. And my son said, what happened? I said, kids, you don't tell them where they had their hands, so you got to always be double, real careful, and, with those things. And that's something we have to be aware of, all the time. But again, I like to tell people the alternative is different. So we're glad that all we got to do is wash our hands and be safe,
right.
Because we're here to keep doing the work that God has given us.
If you had a chance to tell the whole world something, this is your message to the world, what would it be?
I would tell the world that that despite the headaches and heartaches that sometimes exist in life, that as we hold on to God's unchanging hand, that He has the ability to bring us through and give us different perspectives on everything that we engage in. If we look at everything that happens bad as being bad, we'll have our heads down. But if we look at everything as being a part of God's plan for our lives, and He's going to bring us through, we'll keep our heads and our hearts lifted. And we'll live in the expectation of God making good on every single part of our journey that ends up with us in His presence forever.
Okay, that's great. Now, a couple of things. The organizations you're connected to in terms of donation, transplantation, can you share those names of organizations that people are curious to know more or to look out for something?
So in no particular order, LifeLink is who I probably work with the most. LifeLink is an organization that just encourages, it educates people on the different aspects of organ donation and the importance of organ donation, and then, encourages people to actually donate organs. Georgia Transplant Foundation supports people who are having any kind of transplant, any organ, Solid Oregon that they encourage, they support them. So sometimes support may be in getting prepared for the organ, or maybe the medicine after the transplant, because those are real things. Those are real costs
Real costs,
involved. And
yes.
so we have to, those organizations help support people, because sometimes, quite frankly, and I'm not saying there's a checklist to say you can't get an organ, but that's a real thing that they're asking you, your ability, because they don't want to give you an organ and you can't sustain it through the medicine.
Yes, absolutely. Well, my friend, I appreciate you sharing your time,
It's my
your
pleasure.
story, and we will be continuing our days. We're not going to hoard them, but we're
Right.
just going to receive them, right?
Receive them. That's right. That's right.
And we're
That's
going to
right.
count up.
They're going to count up. We're going to
All
count
right.
up.
Thank
Yes.
you so much.
Thank you.